Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the Outside Fence Racing Show, brought to you by teachmehorseracing.com. If you want to learn more about how to punt, get along, check them out. I'm your host, Tristan Heffernan. With me is my Melbourne racing expert, Stewart Bowles-Brown. Bowles, how did the punt treat you on Saturday at Flemington?
It was a winning day, which was nice. A few of the early winners were obviously quite easy to find. It was a good day on the punt, and it's good to be with you once again.
Lovely. I thought it must have been a good day. You're keen to get on tonight, so you must have a bit of head wobbling to be doing. I'm actually excited for this show because we can refer back to episode 1 where we looked at a couple of these lead-up races from Flemington, and to say you nailed them is a bit of an understatement, so I'm looking forward to this. First of all, let's have a look at how the track played on Saturday there at Flemington. The rail went all the way back in from what I could see. Did it play as you expected?
It pretty much did. The rail was back in the true from the 11 metre position, so there was pretty much 11 metres there of fresh ground on the inside. So I was a little bit wary going in that it might play a bit inside, but given there was a bit of juice in the track, I thought we might be okay, sort of coming a bit wider. So, I assumed sort of inside would be okay early, and then probably the fence would chop out a bit as the day went on. But as far as fairness went, you could win from anywhere, and the track played perfectly. As far as the straight races go, there were 2 straight races, and they actually came down the inside part of the track, as opposed to the past few meetings where they've preferred to come down the outside. So, they came down the inside. In fact, in race 1, the winner was hard up against the inside fence, which you sort of don't see too often with straight racing at Flemington.
Yeah, that's pretty unusual, hard up against the inside. When they stay on the inside there in those straight races, is that a good indication that the track's playing really well?
Yeah, it can be. Generally, you'd probably see it most when the rail is true, and particularly say that, for instance, like on Saturday, there was a 2-year-old race 1, and a small field as well. So they generally like to be guided by the rail, and the jockeys are fairly keen to get to the inside fence there.
Excellent. Okay, we've got 3 races to get through today. A couple of these we had a really good talk about 2 weeks ago, leading in with the lead-up races, and then the other one was the Winter Championships. The first one we're going to look at is the Banjo Patterson Final, and it was won by maybe the first horse we were ever a fan of here on the show, Lord Belvedere. We talked about him last week, 2 weeks ago, when he knocked off Chapada, and you were ruining not taking the $16, and we said we'll be able to take the 6-4 next time. We got a little bit better than that. Let's go to the replay here, and you can talk us through this race.
Yep, so we'll pick it up at sort of around the 1,500 metre mark. They've only gone at a very slow speed early in this race. As you can see, it's only a small field with the 5 runners, with Sircconi leading. What you'll notice as they get towards sort of the 1,200 and the 1,000 metre mark, as is his want, Sircconi will really start lifting the pace. Michael Poy knows he's on a genuine stayer, and his best chance of winning was to really try and string them out, make it a true staying test. So as you can see here, he's lifted the pace. The field starts to string out a bit. The winner, Lord Belvedere, is there in 3rd spot in the light blue colours, just losing a bit of contact with the first 2 there. And his main danger in betting was Chapada, who is inside him in the purple colours there. And a horse we mentioned the other week, Alfaris, who had quite a tough run in that fast run race. It's outside the leader currently, and obviously was a bit better suited with the slower early tempo, and looks in a striking position here. But as they turn into the straight, the first 2 are sort of under pressure, and Lord Belvedere looks to be going well, cruising up to him. At this stage, as a punter, I was quite happy with things, with Lord Belvedere looming at Alfaris. Chapada goes back to the inside there, which might not have been the ideal play on the day, but as you can see, he sort of peaks on his run here, as Alfaris and Lord Belvedere fight out the race.
Are you still happy here?
I was a bit sick at the 50, but Ben Mellon pulls out the hands and heels, pushes the horse's head down the line, and I was quite relieved.
Yeah, he looked like he was going to win a lot easier than what he did there, Lord Belvedere. Do we put that down to anything?
No, not as in a chink in the horse or anything like that. Like he's been a fairly genuine horse in his other wins, has gone strong to the line. It might have been purely the fact that it was sort of a bit of a test from say 1200 out, and he had to sort of lead up that second division almost, and he might have just got a little bit tired. They were sort of all horses were sort of out on their feet a bit late, and he just got there in the finish.
I guess the good thing for fans of Lord Belvedere, he didn't lie down when perhaps he looked like he was going to. He still put the head out and got the job done, which is like what you like to see from a horse you like to back. Chapada was the other main horse coming out of the George Watson. He ran second there to Lord Belvedere. He looked pretty disappointing to my eye here. Do you put it back to just going to the inside, or is there a bit more to it?
It possibly that probably didn't help. He might have been better suited coming to the outside, but there also might have been a bit in that it was sort of a true staying test may have been against him, and he did have a perfect run in transit the start prior, whereas at this race he had to start chasing from a fair way out. The jockey reported after the race that the horse raced a bit flat, and then the stable said they'll be freshening up a bit, so that might have come into it a bit as well and sort of meant his finish was a bit dulled by that. He'd been up a while and had sort of a bit of a long prep, so maybe he's just coming towards the end of it.
Okay. Not only did you give Lord Belvedere a really good push on episode 1, you also highlighted the run of Alfaris, who on face value was, well, pretty plain, I guess you could say. He had a tough run outside the lead, which you pointed out, on the strong tempo, and this time on a much softer tempo. I think he's validated what you had to say about him there with a much better performance here. Did you back up at all on Alfaris?
I actually didn't have a bet on Alfaris in this race, which I was feeling a little bit sick about, sort of at the 100 or the 50 metre mark. Just to give some indication of the speed of the race compared to the last time these horses went round. They went it was pretty much the same distance. It was 60 metres further on Saturday, but they've gone about 6 lengths quicker in the lead-up race than they did on Saturday. So Alfaris could have gone two ways from that lead-up run. He could have come out of it with run a really flat race next time, given the hard run, or it could have really brought him on for this race. It's obviously brought him on the way he's run. He's almost won the race. He's just been grabbed late. And that is a sort of a great example of a horse that can have a hard run, particularly first go at sort of that kind of 2,500 metre distance for the preparation. They can really come on from that run now that they've got the miles in the legs. And Alfaris was sort of the winner everywhere bar the last little bit on Saturday.
Yeah, that was a great example of being able to spot a form turnaround there. I think that is something very useful to keep in mind going forward. Now, I guess there's not much really for these horses to go. Will we see a horse like Lord Belvedere through the spring now, you reckon?
Yeah, there's not a huge amount for these horses now, but I'd assume most of them would sort of freshen up a little bit maybe. There might be another staying race in a couple of weeks' time at Flemington that Lord Belvedere may go round in, but a few of these they'll probably have a little freshen up or head to that race and maybe target sort of, I suppose, some Cups qualifiers like the Bart Cummings or something like that in the spring. If they fail in that, then there's plenty of sort of country cups that are available for these horses. So there's no shortage of races around in a few months' time for these types of horses.
Okay, excellent. We'll look now at race 3. Since when did this get called the Taj Rossi Final? I always knew it as the Gibson Carmichael.
It's only been the Taj Rossi for a few years, but yeah, as far as I still remember, it's the Gibson Carmichael, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm clearly up to date there. I don't think I've seen one since Apache Cat one, or, as you rightfully pointed out on Twitter, Humphrey Go-Kart, which I went back through the past runnings of this race, and we got back to 1999, and he still wasn't getting a mention, so I hate to think how long ago he was. But anyway, we saw a win by a horse, Cherry Tortoni, who won 2 weeks ago in the 1,400 metre lead-up to this race. And quite rightfully, you said if they had another slow tempo here, he was clearly going to be the horse to beat. We were hoping maybe for a faster tempo to eventuate, and that might have given us a bit of a different result. But the slower tempo it was at the 1600, and Cherry Tortoni was too good. Did you back up on him here?
Oh, I did. I was very happy to back Cherry Tortoni. There it is in the red colours with the white cap. This race, as Hef mentioned, they've gone into slow speed as well. A little thing, as you'll see, the horse leading at the moment is the Gay Waterhouse horse, and a lot of her horses, as a rule, will run along in front. However, the jockey booking was an interesting one with Dwayne Dunn going on. He's notorious, I suppose you could almost say, for trying to go pretty much going as slow as possible on leaders. So generally, if you can find a race where Dunn's on the leader, you can almost bet your life that it will be run at a slow tempo. And this was the case here. So the main chances here, as I mentioned, were Cherry Tortoni in the red. The main danger in a horse we pointed out 2 weeks ago was Ouster One in the Gulf and Blue there, who's just outside Cherry Tortoni, racing 3 deep at the moment. And they were the two horses really highlighted out of that lead up 1400 metre race. Another horse to keep an eye on is Johnny Get Angry. It's in the red cap, sort of just behind the leaders there, coming one off the fence. It was a bit of a highlight horse for the day, as was trained by former AFL coach Dennis Pagan, having his first runner. But as you say, they're getting to the straight here. Our one's been wide, but it's only been on a slow tempo, so it hasn't been disadvantaged too much. And Cherry Tortoni's got off its back here. And is ready to unleash that dazzling turn of foot that it has. Now, the slow speed here has played right into the hands of Cherry Tortoni because it hasn't sort of stretched him out or anything like that. It's allowed him to use his superior turn of foot, and that's been good enough to win on the day. It's ran the fastest last 400 and 200 of the meeting, and a lot of the best last 400 and 200s of the meeting have come out of this race. That just gives you an indication of how slow they actually have gone, considering these are 2-year-olds racing over a mile. As I mentioned, the runner-up there, Ouster One, did race wide, but it wasn't too much of a disadvantage. It's fought on excellently. Cherry Tortoni looked to have it cold, say at the 100, and as if it might be a comfortable win, but it made Cherry Tortoni work all the way to the line, and it no doubt looks a horse suited to even further distance at this stage of its career. It's actually run the second fastest last 400 and 200 of the meeting, so once again that shows you how slow they actually have gone.
Yeah, that's something we talked about. Maybe it was the first episode that these 2-year-olds can run time comparable to the older horses, especially at this stage of the season. And it's always I think it was the 2,000 metre race actually at Caulfield where some of the late splits were really fast, even in comparison to some of the shorter races on the day. So given there was a couple of straight races, for these horses to run home in such fast late splits, I think that's a massive tick for them. Alcy One, I love the way he fought on. You saw him battling out the lead there with Super Yulong, which to put away a Yulong horse isn't a huge rap, I must admit. But when Cherry Tortoni goes to him, he looks like he's going to go past him, Tortoni, but Alcy One really puts a gap on Super Yulong and the rest of the field to go with Cherry Tortoni. And that fight, I think that's a really great sign for a horse. So he's one that I'll be following wherever he goes, and even through springtime, I think. Now, you mentioned Dennis Pagan having his first runner, the well-named Johnny Get Angry. What a great name. What did you make of his effort there in third?
I thought it was an excellent performance. He ran in that 1400 metre lead-up race as well. That was his first start in a race, and he sat 3 deep with no cover. It was on a slow speed. He led up that 3 deep line, and he battled away okay. He was only beaten sort of 5.5 lengths. It wasn't a horrible run, but it was sort of hard to recommend off the run. But had a better run in transit on Saturday, and up in Tristan with the extra experience. It's run excellent. It actually got held up for a run sort of early in the straight, and those first 2 horses had all the momentum down the outside making their run, whereas Johnny Get Angry had to wait until he'd get over heels and get to the outside before finishing off. I think he wouldn't have finished any closer than third, given even luck, but he definitely should have finished a bit closer to the first 2, and that run shows plenty of promise. I'm not a huge breeding buff, but I'll put on the Caroline Searcy hat here. He's Johnny Get Angry's by Tavistock out of his Seville mare, so you'd say he's got Derby potential written all over him. Whether he's good enough, we'll find out in the spring. But I'd say he's a horse if you're worried about 2,500 at Flemington for a Derby or that kind of distance, it'd be no issues for him.
What a story that would be. Dennis Pagan training a Derby winner with the first horse he's ever got to the races. I'm already kicking that home just for the story. Anywhere for these horses now, or do they sort of freshen up and look for those spring races?
Yeah, well, Cherry Tortoni's definitely having a freshen up. I heard the trainer suggest that. As far as Alcyone and Johnny Get Angry, there's an 1,800 metre race at Flemington in 2 weeks' time for 2-year-olds, which looks perfect for both those horses. Now, I'd definitely favour Alcyone over Johnny Get Angry, just based off their runs on Saturday. But those two look the clear standouts out of that race going to 1,800. And the thing is, with 2-year-olds around that distance, there's not a huge amount of options for them. So I'd expect probably a similar field going to 1,800 next start. So, yeah, Alcyone and Johnny Get Angry, they're definitely the two to follow out of the race going into that.
It's a shame we don't have Michael Moroney producing something like 26 bricks at 1,800 first up anymore. But, yeah, like you say, there probably won't be a big field getting towards that 1,800 metre race. Okay, the last race we're going to look at is the Winter Championship. It's a race I've taken some notice of the last few years. It's been a happy hunting ground for Tassie horses. Shahitzi, Iggy McCool, they won it back-to-back years. Unfortunately, we didn't have a Tassie horse in it this year. Shot of Irish was scratched on race morning. Before we look at this replay, I'm going to try and put the times into perspective here, because we had 3 1,600 metre races on the program, so we can draw a bit of a line through the three of them. There was this race, there was obviously the 2-year-old race we've just watched, and there was the 3-year-old Silver Bowl, which was won by Walking Flying. Now, the tempos in this race and the Silver Bowl were very similar. They ran along at a good clip. Overall, this race, Sircconi winning the Winter Championship, went about 2 lengths quicker than Walking Flying. In comparison, the 2-year-old race, they went 15 lengths slower to the 600 than these older horses did. And then the last 600 was only 2 lengths faster than Sircconi and nearly 5 lengths faster than Walking Flying. So overall, that 2-year-old race was 10 to 12 lengths slower than these two races for the older horses. What I'm taking from all that is that the 3-year-olds line up pretty well here, especially given that Sircconi won by about 4 lengths. And you can find that with these 3-year-olds at the end of the racing season. They're basically older horses now anyway. The 2-year-old's the one I find it hard to make solid conclusions on because of that slow tempo. But given those first two home ran the fastest splits of the day, you can't really pot them because really how fast can they go? So would you say they're fair comments to take out of those races, Balls?
It seems fair to me, and particularly with that 2-year-old race, it's hard to draw too many conclusions outside of if they do meet another slow race, then they're you're comparing apples with apples. But yeah, should they get into a fast race next start, then it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Okay, let's jump onto Sircconi here now. We talked about Sircconi last week. He ran in a 2,000 metre race at Caulfield, and so he's back in trip here off the quick backup, which is something I've found to be... I like this quick backup dropping in trip when the last race was possibly a little bit too far for them, but it really brings them on fitness-wise, and I think that's done the trick here with Sircconi, but I'm going to pop the replay up and turn it over to you, Balls.
Yep. Well, first off, I'd agree entirely with you. His 2,000 metre race last week, as we pointed out, was a very slow affair and then pretty much a 600 metre sprint home, which would be a nice setup for this kind of race. It wouldn't be too taxing on the horse, but enough to sort of derive a bit of benefit from it. So as you see, they've jumped out here. Sircconi's the one in the orange that's currently outside the leader. A horse of note early here is Mr. Marathon Man. He's in the blue colours, moving to third position now with the yellow cap, and about to get outside the leader. Now, he's a bit of a serial pest. For whatever reason, the Moroney stable can't get his head right, and he wants to pull all the time and gets quite fierce. So he got quite keen early, and the jockey had no option but to get him outside the leader. Now, this has contributed to a genuine speed here. They've gone at an above-average tempo, and it's given Sircconi a lovely little sit behind the two leaders here. The race favourite is Plan Ciel. It's just inside Sircconi there in the Australian bloodstock colours. And then other horses to watch are Polly Grey coming to the outside. It's the grey, and the Victoria Star is on its back. So as they come into the straight here, as you can see, Sircconi puts pay to those leaders fairly quickly and shoots clear. Now, if you're looking at the back for chasers to come after it, there aren't really any. As they're pretty much paddling up and down these two ways. Sircconi races away and puts a gap in them in a very impressive win. As you can see, a few have made ground late down the outside. Plan Ciel's sort of fought on okay there, but to be honest, there's not a huge amount you can take away from this race other than that the winner was thoroughly dominant.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, dominant. Can we make a case for anything behind? Like, obviously, Sircconi looks the one to take from the race, given the margin and the way he just totally killed them. But we might just pop the replay on again here of this race, because maybe not so much at this level, but these horses are still going to be going around for a bit the next few weeks. So can we follow anything?
Well, I'll just start off. There were two horses that were sort of, you could say, had genuine excuses. They were Heptagon in the Mick Price blue and white, and Never Again in the black and red colours of Clinton McDonald. They found dead ends in the straight. Now, Heptagon was second favourite for the race and was under pressure before the turn. So whether it would have been in the finish anyway is questionable, but you'd say it did have a minor excuse. Whereas Never Again never really saw too much daylight. I thought it was a doubt at 1,600 myself going into the race, and probably doesn't answer too many questions coming out of it, given it was unlucky.
Okay. Now, I'll jump in there. Which one's Heptagon? Blue and white, there's about 7 of them.
Blue and white in about... see, there's a pack just behind Sircconi.
Yep.
It's just off that pack.
They come to the outside?
No, just in the middle.
Oh, yeah, I got you. In the middle. Beautiful. And obviously Never Again is black in the black and red.
Black and red on the fence there with the white cap and the weekend sleek colours.
Okay. Yep.
So, if you just keep an eye on those, you'll find that they do find trouble sort of early in the straight. Now, the other horse I mentioned the first go-round were Polly Grey and Victoria Star. Now, Victoria Star is definitely a horse of interest out of this race. It's got a good winning record, and it was its first go up to 1,600 on Saturday, and it's run well. Now, the big thing for Victoria Star was that was its first run for 5 weeks, as it had been emergency in a couple of races, not being able to get a run. So I'd say a fast run mile, and it's run well, first run for 5 weeks. I'd say that's very good signs for Victoria Star, if it can find a similar race in the next few weeks. As I said, I did have doubts on it running a mile going into the race, but out of it, I'd be comfortable to back it at a mile if it found the right race. And the other horse that was there was Polly Grey, who ran second. Now, it's a New Zealand mare who didn't do much first up for Chris Waller, but obviously it's got a good record on wet ground and around that sort of mile distance. So it's another, if it finds, say, an open handicap or even a mare's race around the similar distance in the coming weeks, particularly on wet ground, if the rain stays around, it'll be a great chance in that kind of race.
Okay, there's a bit there then. Plan Ciel was well back to run favourite. It seemed pretty plain to me. Am I missing anything there?
No, I don't think you are. It sat behind the leader, pretty much behind the leader, and got a run one off the fence early in the straight. It only whacked away, was sort of a little bit plain, but I'd say it had every chance. If you want to excuse anything, maybe because it was down sort of closer to the inside by that stage of the day, maybe some small excuse for it, but that's only if you're really looking for one.
Okay, I'm not that desperate to look for one, so leave me out of well, I call it Plan Ciel. I'm sure I've heard it pronounced about 10 different times in the last week or so. Of those 3 races, Balls, who would you be most keen to back again next start?
I'd Well, as I mentioned, that 1800-metre two-year-old race that's coming up in 2 weeks' time, I'm not sure what sort of price you're going to get, but Alcyone, I'd be very keen to follow into that.
Okay, excellent. Alcyone. Oh, you want to give us one more? Go for it.
I was just going to say, the Winter Championship final, I'd be a bit sort of wary of the form out of that, considering there was such a big margin winner, and behind that it was very much a bunched finish. I'd almost just take the horse's previous form more so than sort of really pinpointing that one run for them. Yeah.
I guess the one good thing coming out of that race is it was such a strongly run race that's going to be a great base for those horses to move forward off. That's finished off our review of those 3 races from Flemington, but we've got a few viewer questions to get into. Thanks to everyone who sends them in, as stupid as some of them may appear. You know who you are, Adam Upton. First of all, though, I want to just touch on Craig Williams, his stats from last week. You mentioned Craig Williams was really strong in the last month of the season. And since then, I read in an article that he's ridden 42 winners in the final month of the season over the past 4 years, and a $10 win bet on all his rides in that period would have returned a profit of $320 odd on official starting prices. So, did he ride any on the weekend?
He rode 2 on Saturday.
2.
I'm pretty sure. So
nice little start.
I know he rode 2 the previous Wednesday at Sandown as well. So we're probably still in June then, but.
Yeah, he's off to a fly, and then you would have had a $10 win bet on both of those winners, I'm sure.
I don't think I did.
All right, on to the viewer questions. We've got one from Leroy. Okay, with horses starting to come back now for the spring, do you guys get involved betting in futures markets? I don't do a lot of futures betting, so I'll flick this one to you, Balls.
Yeah, so I would only do a small percentage of what I used to now. To be honest, like I would have, when I used to bet, I'd say a lot more in futures. I'd probably beat SP a lot, but generally the results sort of weren't there, or generally there can be some kind of issue in the lead up to the race. So generally, these days pretty much just a day of the race punter, unless sort of once the final fields are announced, if I see something that I think looks wrong. So generally all I'll be looking for now a lot of the time is generally around the Melbourne Cup. If you hear a UK horse is coming out, and sometimes the bookmakers can be a bit slow in moving the price, is sort of, I suppose, one way you can go about it, but they're sort of fairly sharp these days with that, and plus you're competing against a lot of other people who are sort of looking at the same thing. So it's a bit of a race to find the first price, and then bookies are fairly good at turning prices off these days. So that can generally be the case. So I don't tend to focus a lot of my time towards the futures betting these days.
Yeah, it's fair to say the percentages are probably pretty tight these days. Books are very careful not to leave themselves exposed that the Melbourne Cup horses coming from UK, it's a bit of a cat out of the bag. Everyone seems to be all over it these days, and midweek 3-year-old seems to be a spot maybe that you can find an opening. But no, I'm with you. Maybe I'm just scarred as a Tassie punter dealing with track bias all the time, but I don't like to bet too early because you get to the day and your ticket's confetti. But if you do happen to find one at long odds, Leroy, I wouldn't let us turn you off at one iota. Speaking of futures, actually, I saw a really random futures market. Spring Champion Stakes is probably, I can't remember there being a futures market for it this far out, and Cherry Tortoni was listed as equal favourite. What do you think about that? Do you think this is a horse that is definitely a stayer, given what we've seen? He's got an electrifying turn of foot, but we haven't seen him in any strongly run races yet.
I'd want to see it in a strongly run race before I'm determining that this horse can run 2,000 metres or even further. I know there's been a bit of Derby talk about it as well. There's no doubting it has a brilliant turn of foot. But at this stage, I'd probably be saying sort of up to a mile is its go. The thing is, as we know with 3-year-olds, you can be a brilliant and dominant 3-year-old and sort of get those derby distances when you're not really a stayer. So there's always that sort of chance. But yeah, at this stage, talk of spring champion and derbies, I'd be a little bit wary at this stage until I sort of see some kind of substance in a fast run race.
Excellent. I'm going to make a little clip of that for later on in the spring, and we'll come back and revisit that. This one's from Bugle on Twitter. Thank you, Bugle. Is Deane Lester a god? I'll kick off with this one. I think anyone who's grown up with racing has come across Dino's tips at one time or another. Seems like a really genuine, likeable, hard-working bloke. The reason we've answered this one for you, I read an article in the Herald Sun on the weekend. It was an interview with Deane Lester, and just talks about some of the hardships he's gone through health-wise, and some of the great stories he's had on the punt. We all have a good story on the punt, and it was a really fascinating insight into what he's gone through and his approach to punting. So if you can get a hold of that, it's online somewhere. I'd definitely give that a read. It was good reading. Balls, I remember you to be a huge Deane Lester fan over the years.
He's very good to listen to, and obviously is an expert in the area. There's one thing you can do, even if you aren't following him. It's almost wise to even just note who he is tipping, because he does have a strong following in the public, and that can sometimes affect the price of horses and that kind of thing. So it's almost, if you like a horse and you know that he's tipping it, if it hasn't gone off already, it's probably not a bad idea to have something on the horse before sort of all these legion of fans get in and crunch the price a bit.
Before Bugle and his old man just open the drawstrings on the massive bag of cash that they carry around with themselves. One here from Marco B, everyone's favourite Twitter pest. Could Nick Ryan have a potential Devonport Cup horse in his stable after the way Sircconi got the job done? Balls, I know you probably don't really give a stuff about this. For all those Devonport Cup diehards, this is the earliest actually we've pinpointed one for the Devonport Cup. Usually every winner on a Wednesday night at Launceston from about September gets a look in. But yes, he would be very hard to beat the Devonport Cup, Marco. Thanks for that. Also, you've sent in, does Balls plan to handle Dennis Pagan's Johnny? How does Balls plan to handle Dennis Pagan's Johnny get angry next start? We've sort of talked about that, but the second part of your question, how is he going to weight the run against the expectation of its 100-to-1 SP? Now, this is an interesting point, Marco. Thanks for this one. What do you think, Balls?
First off, I'll just say I'm not shocked that Marco is a big fan of the Dennis Pagan stable, given Marco's love of the Carlton Football Club and the sterling job that Dennis did there in the early 2000s. So I'm not surprised at all that he's become attached to that stable.
Who did a better job, Dennis or Mick?
I'd almost say Dennis did. He just came in when the joint was ruined. Mick sort of sent it that way, didn't he? Back on to more serious matters, though. As far as the 100-to-1 SP goes for Johnny Get Angry. Now, obviously, I've spoken about SPs a fair bit sort of over the 3 shows that we've done, and sort of the guidance, I suppose, they can give you. Now, Johnny Get Angry's only had 2 starts, so a horse who's really lightly raced, I'm less inclined to really care about their SPs. More so will care about their racetrack performances and what I perceive, like how good or bad they were. But one thing with it, I'm sure there's probably a chance that its next start it has, whether it be in that 1,800-metre race in 2 weeks' time. The fact that he ran around at 100-to-1 in what looks like the lead-up race would have some effect on his price. So as far as if you're anticipating to back the horse, you probably think you might get a half-reasonable price, maybe a better price than what you'd think purely looking at the performance. But as far as thinking that's kind of some kind of anchor on the horse or some kind of issue with the race or anything like that, given that they're all generally lightly raced horses, it's not something that sort of I'm too worried about or I take into account massively, as opposed to if the horse was probably a bit more exposed.
That's a good way to put it, Balls. One more question for you. How did you get your nickname? Now, I almost didn't bring this up because the story is incredibly underwhelming, but I'll give you the floor here.
Yeah, you're quite right. It is very underwhelming. Yeah, someone who I used to play basketball with just started calling me stew balls, and the balls part stuck, and here we are.
Here we are indeed. All right. Any more insight you want from us, Burgle, feel free to write in again next week. That takes us into takeaway of the week. Now, balls are cool. I'm going to let you run away with this one to start with, and the feeling you might have given us a little tip into what you're going to run through this week already.
Well, I mentioned it a little bit with Johnny Get Angry. My takeaway of the week is to do with SPs and how last start SP can always be a good indicator of what the opening price of a horse will be at its next run. Now, the example I'll use will be the Lord Belvedere Chapata race from this week, and obviously they met 2 weeks ago as well. So when they met 2 weeks ago, Chapata was $4, Lord Belvedere was $15, and Lord Belvedere beat it. And without knowing the prices, if you just watched that race, you'd say beat it on its merits and was the better horse. Now, and if they met again in 2 weeks' time, you'd probably say, well, you'd expect Lord Belvedere to win again because given similar factors and similar circumstances, you'd expect Lord Belvedere to win again. Now, the prices tab generally go up first for Saturday races on a Wednesday afternoon. And so they've gone up for the race on Saturday, and Lord Belvedere's gone up $4.60 and Chapata's gone up $2.80. Now, I wasn't quick enough to get the $4.60, but there were some punters that did, and the horse sort of progressively firmed as it was and ended up actually starting favourite over Chapata. I suppose the takeaway there can be that, say, if you like a horse that's coming off a run with a big SP, it can really pay to be on high alert for when the prices come out for their next start, because there might be a bit of a premium there for you. And a lot of the time, for instance, if other people have seen that run, as obviously was the case with Lord Belvedere, the price probably won't last long. So if you can be quick, obviously you can get a great price like the $4.60 Lord Belvedere was on Saturday. It ended up starting pretty much around the $2.80 mark. They pretty much swapped their prices, and obviously, as we've seen, Lord Belvedere ended up winning the race, and Chapata sort of finished well back.
Yeah, happy days for viewers of episode 1 who no doubt took the $4.60 there, Lord Belvedere. Mine's just a quick one this week. I discussed this with Balls on Sunday, actually, after I backed a loser. I'm going to say be wary of a horse who has performed well off soft runs and inside draws when they then come up with a wider gate and the potential to face the breeze or do a bit more work to find a position. This one's a little bit individual horse specific. Horses can look like different animals, though, when they get smothered up in the run, and then they can produce a big turn of foot off that run. But sometimes those same horses, when they're forced to face the breeze, they don't perform anywhere near as well, especially a horse with a short sprint or one that hasn't yet shown that they can sustain a long run through the line. Just be very wary of getting carried away with how good they look when they're cluttered up, if that's not going to be the case at their next start. That's about it for this show, Balls. What have we got coming up this week in terms of Victorian racing?
Yep, so the main attraction this week will be a meeting at Caulfield on Saturday featuring the Sir John Monash Stakes, which is a bit of half a sniff of spring, but obviously we're still deep into winter and it's freezing cold, but it gives some kind of small hope, small light at the end of the tunnel that we are getting closer to spring, and hopefully the COVID situation in Victoria settles down a bit and it doesn't hinder the spring carnival that will be on our doorstep before we know it.
Yeah, I think you're right. The spring does tend to get here quicker than what you realise, and a Group 3 race is the first glimpse of that. Thanks again for your time, Balls. Thanks to everyone who has watched this episode. Don't forget to give us a like or subscribe to the channel, or a bit of love on Twitter, or anything you can do is much appreciated. And we've got no remember when this week, Balls. We'll work on something for next week. But thanks for your time, and I'll see you next week.